Hi there, welcome back on day second of Azure Backups from the AZ-104 module. So in the last video, we understood what all are the basic backup terminology fundamentals before we actually dive into the Azure Backup. In this video, we'll understand what is Azure Backup and how it functions and what workloads it supports. So let's get started. So organizations know the importance of data, right? And how crucial it is to backup, secure and maintain it. Now data would be from various sources like VMs, SQL, or any other kind of data, and IT teams play a very important role in safeguarding it. Many companies have their own compliance set of standards or policies that dictate backup specification, their duration, and the restore policies. For example, we may want some data to be stored for a week in case something goes wrong, like data corruption to revert back, while we may want some data to be stored for longer, like 5 years due to compliance or audit. Now, primarily, there have been two main ways how backups and restore was being done before cloud and everything. Now, on-premises was not as flexible as cloud, and the drawback was we did not get the quick restore. The solution was not scalable, and the safeguard of our data to another region was very difficult also because to add infrastructure it is going to take time and planning. While in cloud we can easily add our backups to secondary region so that if case something goes wrong in one, we can recover our data from the second one, right? So as we discussed, data is the lifeblood of any organization, and every organization has some mechanisms how they store and recover their data via backups. And in this one, we'll discuss how Azure Backup can help us from the traditional backup storing like on-premises, and how cloud helps us in providing resilience, availability, and all other benefits. So in the traditional way, in the on-premises, what happened that we had to plan our data and then buy the data drives, store the backups, and this would require initially planning. That planning can also sometimes go far beyond, right? Because data in any company will always get increased, so we have to pay the capital expenses for all the hardware we buy. And whereas in Azure Backup, we do not have that issues because the infrastructure in cloud is already deployed. They have their data centers across the globe, and we can store our data and backups anywhere around the world. So Azure Backup is a service from Azure, Microsoft, and it helps us to back up a lot of resources or workloads like Azure VMs, their disk, and our databases, which includes the SQL Server, SAP HANA, PostgreSQL, and MySQL installed in Azure. We can also back up the Azure files and blobs. Both are part of the storage account we create in Azure, and it has support for Kubernetes clusters. Also, in the on-premises, we can back up our workloads with the agent installed on our on-prem servers, and that data will then get pushed from the agent to the Azure. So Azure Backup, whatever were the limitations of the traditional system, they offer a comprehensive support for a wide resources. Now, to understand the definition of a Azure Backup, it is a cloud-based service providing which is simple, secure, cost-effective solution for data backup and recovery. Now, to manage Azure Backup is very easy. You just have to define the schedules, the policies, and how often we want to take the backups, and that's it. It will automatically add those workloads to the backup. Also, it has a zero infrastructure approach. You do not have to manage the underlying hardware or storage. Everything is managed for you by the cloud provider. And this also significantly then reduces your capital and operational expenses because you are only going to pay for what data capacity you are using instead of paying upfront cost like we used to do in the on-premises. So if you look in this diagram, in the on-premises side, what happens is the backup agents get installed, and then that data gets pushed to the Azure Backup Service. And in Azure Backup Service, we've got a recovery point management. So suppose in a VM, what happens is whenever we take a backup, it creates that particular recovery point, and we can restore from there. We have got resilience and availability. Basically, that will move your data across the regions, dependent upon what we define while we are creating our vault where all the data goes in. And this will help us if a region where our data is stored, a disaster happens on it, our data will be safeguarded if we are replicating it to a different region. We have storage management, and then we have data tiering, which is basically three tiers how your backup is taken and stored. One is snapshot, and then we have standard and then archive. Snapshot simply means you're going to instant recover from any corruption of your workload. Your data is stored alongside your workload, and that helps you to instantly recover your data, and mostly it is for VMs. Standard is when your data is moved to a vault where ultimately all your data goes in, and to recover data from there it's going to take some time because your data is being taken out from the vault first and then it's going to be restored. The last we have archive tier, which is for a longer duration like for a year or 5 years, like when we have to store the data for compliance purposes. Then also we have a lot of security built in around our backup service. We have called multi-user authentication, basically who can access and perform the backup or restore operations. We can define that via our access control policies like IAM. We have also got the policy management. Policy management helps us to automatically include any new workloads we create. It's automatically going to add those workloads to the Azure backup. Then we have got a monitoring and a reporting. Monitoring helps us to whatever backup jobs are happening every day. We can monitor all and we can set up an alert if any job fails. We can receive alert and then can work on it. Then we also have the reporting. Reporting is how much data you are storing in your backup service or your vault. We can have a lot of inbuilt reporting solutions which are provided by Microsoft. And then we have the built-in backup like the services from Azure itself, like VMs, Azure Storage Account, blobs and files, your SAP HANA workloads. So all of these are built-in cloud-native workloads, and we just define the schedule policies and Azure takes care of everything. Before proceeding further, I want to clear like Azure Backup Service. You can think of Azure Backup Service as a brain who takes care of the backing up your workloads, and ultimately all the data whatever you're taking is going to be taken to your recovery services vault or backup vault, and these vaults are the large pool of storage accounts where all our backup data gets stored eventually. So if I go to the Azure portal, right, so here when we search for Azure Backup you won't find any service with this name, right? And like I discussed, we have a backup vault and a recovery services vault where all our data goes in. So Microsoft provides us various options like how our workloads from on-premises can be backed up to Azure. So whenever we are using on-premises workloads, we are going to use the recovery services vault. This have the option for the on-premises backup support. We have got Mars Agent, which is Microsoft Azure Recovery Services agent that gets installed on your on-prem servers. Then that agent will then push your workload data, whatever we have specified to backup. It can be of files or folders, and then agent will move the data to the Azure Recovery Services vault. Another option we have is DPM, which is a data protection manager, or Microsoft Azure Backup Server. So in the Azure Backup Server, we have a kind of a separate server in Azure. All the data from on-premises get first moved to this Azure Backup Server. And because your Azure Backup Server is in Azure, when the data gets moved from on-prem to your this server, we can natively add that particular backup server for backups. These are application-aware backups and full VM backups, Hyper-V or VMware, and ultimately backups are sent securely to RSV in Azure. Now the use case is why would we use on-premises and then store it in cloud? So suppose we are storing our data in one of our premises like North Central US, and if there's an outage and we want our data to be recovered in case something goes wrong on that location, we can use the cloud for our data storage, and cloud can help us to add our workloads to various region rapidly. It can be also due to long-term archival storage, and this is the data flow. We have our server workstations in on-premises and we install a backup agent on it, and then backup agent whatever we have specified files or folders to backup from there, it will move that to your Azure Recovery Services vault via HTTPS. Now, key features of Azure Backup is you do not have to maintain any infrastructure, everything is managed for you. You just deploy the policies and workloads which you want to backup. Other we have is a at scale management. We have got a unified portal which is a business continuity center wherein we can see all the workloads we are backing up. We can get a report, we can create policies and all other things that helps us to manage backup workloads. And it can be done via APIs, PowerShell and CLI also. We have got a built-in security encryption at rest and in transit. We can use the private endpoints, meaning all our data flow is going to be private and not in the public internet. I will show you this while we create the recovery services vault, how we can do this. And also we have the ransomware protection. Also Azure Backup follows a lot of regulatory standards. So as we discussed previously, Azure Backup is not a service which you can just search on Azure. It's a brain wherein we'll specify which workload we want to backup, or we can just add them from the vault. But this will take care of adding those workloads like VM, SQL, or any other kind of data to the vault. And Recovery Services Vault is actually the service where all your backup data goes to, and we can just search in the portal also, right? When we see the Azure Backup is a conceptual service, not a resource you directly create. It provides the underlying capabilities for taking and managing backups of Azure workloads and the on-premises data. And Azure Backup utilizes Vault to securely store backup data. And you can think of it as an engine which is powering your backup operation. And Recovery Services Vault is actually a resource which you deploy and manage in Azure. Helps you to back up your data and also your disaster recovery operation. Next we have is a backup vault. So as we saw earlier, in the portal we have backup vault and recovery services vault. Backup vault supports only our backup workloads, while recovery services vault is a more versatile which supports your disaster recovery, near-time replication of your data, and also our on-premises workload. So recovery services vault is a more versatile, while backup vault only takes care about your Azure backup, like adding your workloads to only just backups, and will not support your disaster recovery. Lastly, we have is a business continuity center, which is like a management plane for all your backup operations, workloads, reports, monitoring, alerts, everything. In this pane of view, we can see everything what is happening on our side. And if you see in the portal, when we go to the business continuity center, we can see how much workloads we are protecting and what is the status. We can go to the this business continuity disaster recovery coverage of all environment. We can see the monitoring whatever we have set up. We can see the compliance. Also in the left side we can see here protected items and what we can add to backups. If we have not added, we can see from here, and we have then get alerts, metrics, jobs, reports, etc. Right? And RPO and RTO is what we understood deeply in the last video. But just to summarize in this one, RPO is how often we are taking backups. Like if we are taking backup every 4 hours, meaning we will always have the 4 hours of data. And RTO is if a disaster happens, how quick or fast we can recover from our workload. So if we say 3 hours is our RTO for our application, meaning we can recover from an outage in 3 hours. So how Azure Backup actually works. So we have got a workload integration layer. So when we say about workload, it can be on premises, on your VMs, your SQL, or any other kind of workload which it supports, right? So if we want to add them to the backup, we would need to integrate that to the Azure Backup. We can directly go to the resource and add from there to the backups. Azure will take care of automatically if it's a cloud native workload. And the only thing we have to do is to specify the schedule, how often we want to take the backup, and the policy. Next we have the data plane access tier. Whenever the backup is taken and the data is stored, we have three tiers which we discussed earlier also: snapshot, standard, and archive. Snapshot is for quick restore operations, and the reason why the restore happens quick because your data is stored alongside your disk. Mostly it is for your Azure virtual machine workloads. Because your data is in the snapshot type and it's stored alongside your disk, you can quickly restore it. While when the data goes into the standard tier, it is going to take time for recovering from there. First the data gets out from the standard tier and then it start the restore operation. And archive is for a long-term retention like 1 year or 5 years. And all these tiers have their own pricing structure. I'll share the link in the description side for how we can check the Azure Backup pricing, and we'll go through the pricing in this video also. Another one we have is our availability and security. So availability, we have various options in Azure, how we can store our data and replicate it in various zones or regions to safeguard it. To understand this, let's go. So when we create the recovery services vault, we can see we have two options. One is locally redundant and geo redundant. So let's understand first locally redundant. So in the locally redundant storage, whenever a backup happens, it is going to store in an underlying hardware in the Microsoft side, and it's going to be in a particular one data center. But in a single data center, three copies of your data is going to be taken, so that even if one hardware fails, our data can be recovered from a different hardware, right? But suppose an entire data center goes down in case of a power outage or disaster, anything, right? So that case our data is gone, right? We won't be able to recover it. So for that option, if our data is very critical, we can use the next option, which is a zone redundant storage. So in a zone redundant storage, we have multiple data centers. So in a single region, suppose for South Central US, we have three zones, and each zone is separated from each other at least 300 to 400 kilometers. And that way, even if a data center outage happens in a single place, our data is copied across different zones, so we can recover from a different zone. So in this case, our data is aggregated across zones, and one copy is stored in zone 1, then zone 2, and then zone 3. Outage happens on zone 1, our data can be recovered from zone 2 and zone 3. But what happens if our entire region goes down, like South Central goes down? So in this case, we have another option, which is geo redundant storage. And in geo redundant storage, what happens is our data is replicated to a different region. Like for a South Central US, our data will get replicated across North Central US. And when a region goes down, all zones also goes down, right? So in that case, our data will be accessible from a different region. So this is how we can safeguard our data in case of a disaster or any unforeseen outages. Also, we have a read access GRS, meaning when enabled, we can access our workload stored in the secondary location for a backup drill or any test case scenario. We want to see how our backup will be accessed or how our applications can be brought up in case of an outage. So we have a read access GRS, which makes our data stored in the secondary region accessible. Otherwise, if we are not using this option, only when the Microsoft declares an outage, we can access that data. Right, so as we discussed, recovery services vault is for your on-prem, your disaster recovery plus backing up your workloads, but backup vault is specifically for your workload backups. So in this option, you can also see we have a geo redundant, then zone redundant, and locally redundant. Let's go back. So we saw how LRS, GRS, ZRS helps us to secure our data, and which ensures your high availability, and also all data which is stored is encrypted. We have got RBAC, role based access control, basically who can access our data. Then we have a soft delete. Soft delete helps us when our data gets accidentally deleted. Azure Recovery Services Vault provides us 14 days of data recovery even if after it's deleted, and it's free of charge. Management plane we saw earlier, we can use the Recovery Services Vault and Backup Vault for seeing how our workloads are getting backed up, how to recover, basically manage them. On top of it, we have our business continuity wherein we can plan and define what approach we can take to recover from any outage. So next we have is the comprehensive backup types and management. So we have got various backup types. When we take the backup, we have various options how we can enable the backup. So first three which you are seeing is for SQL workload. So full backup in this case will capture your entire SQL databases, and it can be configured for once per day or a week. And differential will take whatever backup that happens after the first full backup. It will include all those data, and it is also allowed once per day, and it cannot be configured on the same day as the full backup. And then we have is the transaction log. So transaction log for our SQL workloads we can enable for every 15 minutes, provides us with the point in time recovery up to the second. And next three is for our VMs, the incremental backup, multiple backups, and selective disks. So incremental backup is for our Azure VM workloads. The first backup is going to be the full backup. So whenever we add any VM to the backups, the first one is going to be a full, and after that every backup schedule is going to be the incremental, meaning only the delta changes that happened after the previous backup will be included in the next one. And this helps us to use the less storage. And multiple backups is like earlier Azure VM supported only once a day backup. Now we have got multiple backups in a single day. So we can configure our VM workloads backups every 4 hours, and in a single day we can have up to 6 recovery points. This will support our premium SSD V2 and Ultra Disk and trusted launch VMs. Next we have a selective disk. Instead of backing a VM as a whole, like instead of if our VM has 5 disks and we just want to back up one disk, we have that option as well. This helps us to enable the backup for particular disk only which is critical for us, and while others we can ignore. So all of this, what we discussed in this one, we are going to go through practical on the next one. We will create the backup vault, the recovery services vault. We'll drill down on business continuity center. Also, we'll add on-premises workloads, our Azure VMs, storage account, and other workloads which it supports to see how it actually functions and works. So in last, how we can make the choice is Azure Backup right for us. For this, we can do is take our existing workloads in on-premises or in whatever cloud we have, how we backup them, and how convenient or complex it is. Also, we can look upon the security and management kind of things. Then compare with Azure Backup. If Azure Backup provides solution which is more convenient, simple, and easier to manage, and also cost effective, then Azure Backup is the right choice for you. And to make that choice, the number one thing which we have to look upon is the pricing of Azure Backup. So let's go through that a little bit. Now to check the pricing, we'll go to Azure Pricing Calculator. And in Azure Pricing Calculator, we'll search for backup and view. So we can choose a region where we want to store the backup and what is the type, if it's Azure VMs, Blob, on-premises, Azure Files, SQL Server, Azure PostgreSQL or Flexible Server, Kubernetes Service. So for this we'll use Azure VMs and we'll use the backup policy as a standard, enhanced has a different structure. So I'll use one VM and will tell how much data it contains. Let me add 100 gigabytes and I'm going to retain the daily backups, whatever is happening every day for 30 days, and retain weekly backups for 2. I want to retain monthly backup or a yearly backup, and I'm saying I want to use 2, so I can use 2 snapshot tier recovery points which will have the instant recovery option, and then I can specify, which we discussed, redundancy option. It plays an important role in the pricing because if we are using GRS, it's going to replicate your data and the cost will be higher compared to the LRS, right? So we have 4 options, we can choose accordingly and then we can see what it's going to cost us in Azure. So this is how Azure Backup functions, their services it supports, how do we manage it, and also the prices around it. So let's meet in the next one wherein we'll understand this in detail. Thank you.